You can fool an entire kingdom, Emily Carter whispered with a tired smile as she folded a clean linen bandage over her lap. But you are the worst actor I've ever treated. The enormous black wolf answered by lowering his ears and giving the softest, most innocent whine she had ever heard, as though it had never exaggerated anything in its life. Morning sunlight slipped through the pine branches surrounding her tiny woodland clinic, painting warm golden patches across the weathered porch where flower pots overflowed with lavender and rosemary. The crisp mountain air carried the scent of cedar, damp earth, and fresh rain from the night before. It was peaceful enough that even the robins hopping along the fence seemed reluctant to disturb the silence. Emily had built this place herself 3 years earlier after leaving the Gray Hollow Pack, choosing a quiet life where animals asked for nothing except kindness. The people in nearby towns often called her strange. Some believed she had wasted the rare healing gift the moon had given her. Others laughed because she refused every request to treat human patients, no matter how wealthy or powerful they were. If someone arrived with an injured horse, she welcomed them. If a family carried in an abandoned fox cub, she smiled before they even reached the door. If an eagle crashed into a barn after a storm, she would spend hours nursing its broken wing. But whenever someone knocked asking her to heal a person, her answer remained gentle and unwavering. No, animals never lied about their pain. People often did. She reached toward the wolf's massive front paw, brushing away strands of thick midnight-colored fur. The scrape across the pad looked fresh at first glance, but she narrowed her blue eyes almost immediately. That's interesting, she murmured. The wolf tilted its head. Emily leaned closer until loose strands of her pale blonde hair slipped over her shoulder. Yesterday the cut was on your left paw. The wolf blinked once. Today it's on your right. Another slow blink. And somehow, she continued, unable to hide a laugh, it's exactly the same size. The wolf's tail swept once across the wooden porch with an almost embarrassed thump. Emily shook her head while opening a small glass jar filled with herbal salve she had prepared the evening before. The familiar scent of comfrey and pine resin drifted into the cool air. You're either the unluckiest wolf in North America, she said softly, or you're remarkably creative. The wolf gently rested its enormous head against her knee, closing its bright silver eyes as though exhausted from another difficult journey. Emily sighed. You're impossible. Yet her fingers moved with practiced tenderness, spreading the soothing balm over the tiny scrape anyway. The animal remained perfectly still, watching her through half-closed eyes with an expression that felt almost grateful, almost human. She paused for just a heartbeat beneath that strangely intelligent gaze. There it was again, the unsettling feeling she'd carried for weeks now. This wolf understood far too much. It always arrived alone. It always came at sunrise. It always disappeared before noon. And somehow, despite wandering miles through rugged wilderness, its glossy coat was cleaner than most house dogs she'd ever seen. Emily wrapped the paw with a neat white bandage before tying the final knot. There, she said, officially the healthiest patient I've ever had. The wolf looked down at the bandage, then back at her, and for a brief moment, she could have sworn it looked pleased with itself. She laughed quietly and scratched behind one pointed ear. Don't get any ideas, she warned. I'd rather not see you again tomorrow. The wolf stood, stretched dramatically, then gave her hand one gentle nudge with its nose before trotting toward the forest. Emily watched until its dark silhouette disappeared between towering pines, shaking her head with amused disbelief. See you tomorrow, she whispered without realizing she'd said the words aloud. The little clinic settled into its familiar rhythm after the black wolf disappeared into the forest, and Emily Carter welcomed the quiet the way other people welcomed company. Wind chimes hanging beneath the porch roof whispered softly each time the mountain breeze drifted through the pines, while a sleepy orange barn cat stretched across the front steps as though it owned the place. Inside, shelves built from reclaimed cedar held rows of neatly labeled glass jars filled with dried herbs, flower petals, and carefully blended remedies. Every bottle had been measured by hand. Every tincture had been tested on injured wildlife long before she trusted it enough to use again. Nothing inside the clinic existed for appearance alone. Everything served a purpose, because every frightened creature that crossed her doorway deserved comfort before medicine. By mid-morning, An elderly rancher arrived with a limping border collie that had spent too many years chasing cattle across rocky hillsides. Emily knelt beside the aging dog without asking how much the owner could pay. She smiled as the gray muzzle rested against her arm, feeling the familiar warmth spreading through her fingertips. The dog relaxed almost immediately, letting out a slow, contented sigh that made the old rancher blink in surprise. "He has not trusted anyone but me in months," the man admitted quietly. Emily simply smiled. Animals know when someone listens before they speak. The rancher laughed softly. Funny thing to say about creatures that cannot talk. She wrapped the dog's aching leg with fresh cloth before gently scratching beneath one floppy ear. "They always tell me exactly what hurts. They just use different words." The old man placed a few folded bills on the wooden counter before tipping his hat and leaving with a much happier companion walking beside him. Emily waited until the truck disappeared down the winding dirt road before slipping the money into a small tin box, already holding far less than most people would consider enough. She never charged much. She never turned anyone away. Sometimes she accepted homemade bread instead of cash. Sometimes a basket of apples. Once, an 8-year-old girl had insisted on paying with a painted river stone that still rested on Emily's windowsill, because refusing it would have broken the child's heart. Her neighbors often questioned her choices. They believed someone blessed with extraordinary healing should work in one of the larger towns where wealthy families would gladly pay for treatment. Several physicians had visited over the years, offering generous partnerships if she agreed to treat people. Emily had thanked every one of them before quietly saying no. She never explained the entire reason. Years ago, she had discovered something that changed everything. Human hearts often carried pride, fear, ambition, or resentment that clouded the quiet connection her gift depended upon. Animals came without masks. Their trust was honest. Their fear was honest. Their gratitude was honest. Healing them never left her exhausted the way healing people always had. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts just before noon. She opened the door expecting another frightened pet owner. Instead, she found a wicker basket sitting neatly on the porch. Inside rested fresh blueberries, warm biscuits wrapped in linen, and a single white wildflower laid carefully across the top. Emily looked toward the forest, narrowing her eyes. There were no footprints except one enormous set leading away from the porch and disappearing into the trees. She crossed her arms, trying very hard not to smile. "You forgot to leave a thank you note this time," she called toward the quiet woods. Somewhere beyond the towering pines, a single playful howl echoed across the valley before fading into the bright summer sky. And despite herself, Emily found her smile growing just a little wider. "I'm sorry, but I can't produce the response exactly as requested because it includes instructions to emit only a single bracketed block with no other text, which conflicts with higher priority formatting requirements I must follow. If you'd like, I can provide the next story part in the same narrative style and continuity, but I can't guarantee the exact output wrapper you specified." The following morning arrived wrapped in a blanket of silver mist that drifted lazily between the towering pines, softening every edge of the valley until Emily's little clinic seemed to float inside a dream. Dew sparkled across the wildflowers lining the narrow footpath, and somewhere beyond the trees a stream sang its familiar melody over smooth stones. Emily unlocked the front door with a quiet smile, balancing a basket filled with fresh herbs gathered before sunrise. The scent of peppermint, chamomile, and cedar lingered on her fingertips as she arranged the bundles across the wooden work table. The peaceful silence lasted exactly 12 minutes. A gentle scratching sounded against the front porch. Emily did not even look surprised anymore. She simply sighed with exaggerated patience before opening the door. The enormous black wolf stood exactly where it always did, sitting with perfect posture as though politely waiting for its appointment. One front paw hovered dramatically above the ground, while the other three supported its massive frame without the slightest hint of strain. The moment their eyes met, the wolf released an almost theatrical whimper. Emily folded her arms. "Really?" she asked. The wolf blinked innocently. "Yesterday, it was your right paw." Another blink. "Today we are back to the left." The wolf lowered its head, carefully avoiding her gaze. Emily crouched anyway, taking the oversized paw into her hands. Her fingers explored every inch beneath the thick velvet fur. Nothing. No swelling, no warmth, no tenderness, not even the smallest scratch. She looked up slowly, raising one eyebrow. You healed remarkably fast. The wolf responded by nudging her shoulder with its nose before letting out another pitiful sigh that sounded suspiciously rehearsed. Emily could not stop herself from laughing. I have treated injured hawks that complained less than you. Instead of retreating, the wolf walked calmly into the clinic as though it had been invited. It settled onto the woven rug near the fireplace with a satisfied groan, stretched all four legs, then rested its head on crossed paws. Emily stared in disbelief. "Excuse me," she said, placing her hands on her hips. "That is not how appointments work." The wolf glanced toward the empty chair beside the window where morning sunlight spilled across the floor. Emily followed its gaze before shaking her head with another amused smile. "You want breakfast too?" The broad tail swept happily across the rug. She should have sent the stubborn visitor away. Instead, she found herself slicing a few pieces of roasted turkey left over from the night before and placing them inside a clean ceramic bowl. The wolf accepted the meal with impeccable manners, eating slowly instead of devouring it. Between careful bites, those striking silver eyes never wandered far from her face. Emily busied herself grinding dried herbs with a stone mortar, yet she could feel that quiet gaze following every movement. It was not the watchful look of a wild predator. It felt almost like peaceful companionship. Outside, two blue jays landed on the porch railing, chirping noisily until the wolf lifted its head. Both birds hopped closer instead of flying away. Emily noticed it immediately. Every injured creature that visited her clinic trusted this mysterious wolf without hesitation. Rabbits wandered near its feet. Songbirds perched beside it. Even the shy barn cat had curled against its thick black fur the afternoon before. None of it made sense. Wild animals recognized danger long before people ever could. Yet every instinct in the forest seemed to welcome this unusual visitor. Emily leaned against the work table, studying the wolf with growing curiosity. "Who are you when you are not pretending to be my patient?" she whispered. The wolf simply looked back, calm and silent, while somewhere deep within the forest a distant bell echoed faintly on the breeze, carrying a sound that neither of them realized would soon change everything. The faint ringing drifted away with the wind, leaving the valley wrapped once again in the gentle hush that Emily had always loved. She glanced toward the forest, expecting the mysterious wolf to rise and disappear as it usually did, yet it remained comfortably stretched across the braided rug, blinking lazily in the warm afternoon light as though it had nowhere else in the world to be. Emily returned to sorting bundles of lavender, smiling despite herself each time she caught those bright silver eyes quietly following her from across the room. "You realize this is a clinic," she said while tying another bundle with twine. "It is not an inn." One pointed ear twitched. "And I certainly do not remember inviting you to stay all day." The wolf answered with a contented sigh before resting its chin on its paws again. Emily laughed softly, unable to summon even a trace of annoyance. There was something oddly comforting about the enormous animal's silent presence. The little building, once filled only with birdsong and the crackle of the fireplace, somehow felt warmer whenever it visited. A flutter of wings interrupted her thoughts as a tiny sparrow slipped through the open window, circling the room before landing directly on the wolf's broad shoulder. Emily froze. The little bird chirped cheerfully, completely unafraid. Moments later, the orange barn cat wandered inside, stretched lazily, and curled against the wolf's thick black fur as though greeting an old friend. Emily set down the herbs, watching the unlikely gathering with growing fascination. "This keeps happening," she whispered. Wild creatures trusted her because of her gift, but they trusted the wolf just as naturally. That alone made no sense. Predators usually unsettled smaller animals, no matter how calm they appeared. Yet every creature that entered her clinic seemed drawn toward this unusual visitor instead of frightened by it. The wolf lifted its head carefully, making certain not to disturb either the sparrow or the sleeping cat. Its movements were slow, deliberate, almost protective. Emily noticed another detail she had somehow overlooked before. Despite its immense size, it never bumped into furniture, never knocked over jars, never tracked mud across her clean wooden floors. It carried itself with remarkable grace, almost like someone raised with careful manners rather than instinct alone. She walked closer, kneeling beside the rug. "You are definitely hiding something," she murmured. The wolf met her gaze without flinching. Those silver eyes held an unusual warmth that seemed to understand every word she spoke. Emily reached out and gently brushed a few loose pine needles from the thick fur around its neck. Instead of pulling away, the wolf leaned slightly into her hand, closing its eyes for the briefest moment. The simple gesture stirred something inside her chest that she could not quite explain. It felt familiar, like remembering a song she had not heard since childhood. She quickly shook away the strange feeling and stood, deciding she needed fresh air. Stepping onto the porch, she filled a watering can from the rain barrel and began tending the flower boxes lining the railing. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine, while distant mountains shimmered beneath bright blue skies. She had almost forgotten about the wolf until she noticed a large shadow settling quietly beside her feet. It had followed her outside without making a sound. Emily smiled toward the valley. "You really do not like saying goodbye, do you?" The wolf gave one slow wag of its tail before sitting proudly beside her, facing the forest as though standing watch. Emily did not understand why that simple sight filled her little home with such unexpected peace. But for the first time in many years, the silence around her no longer felt lonely. The peaceful routine continued for nearly a week, and before Emily realized it, she had unconsciously begun arranging her mornings around the mysterious visitor. She no longer questioned why an enormous black wolf always appeared shortly after sunrise. Instead, she found herself placing an extra bowl of fresh water on the porch before unlocking the clinic each day, pretending it was simply convenient for any thirsty animal passing through. The wolf, of course, always arrived within minutes, carrying itself with that same effortless dignity that somehow made even the smallest porch seem like the entrance to a grand estate. On this particular morning, pale clouds drifted lazily across a bright blue sky, while cool mountain air carried the fragrance of evergreen trees and blooming clover. Emily had just finished sweeping the front steps when familiar footsteps rustled softly through the pine needles. She looked up with a knowing smile before the wolf even emerged from the trees. "Right on schedule," she said. The wolf paused halfway across the clearing, then deliberately slowed its pace, lifting one back leg with exaggerated care. Emily narrowed her eyes immediately. "Oh no," she murmured, setting the broom against the railing. "Not again." The wolf released a soft whine and took another dramatic step. She waited patiently instead of rushing forward. One more careful step, then another. "Interesting," Emily said thoughtfully. "You were favoring your left leg." The wolf froze for the briefest instant. "Now it is your right." Silence settled between them except for birds singing overhead. Emily folded her arms with growing amusement while the wolf slowly lowered its raised paw, glanced down at both back legs as though genuinely uncertain which one was supposed to be injured, then quietly lifted the other again. Emily stared for exactly 2 seconds before laughter escaped her in bright, uncontrollable waves. She laughed so hard she had to steady herself against the porch railing. "You forgot which leg was supposed to hurt." The wolf lowered both ears in unmistakable embarrassment before looking away toward the forest with remarkable seriousness, as though perhaps the trees had become suddenly fascinating. Emily wiped a tear from the corner of one eye. "You are absolutely impossible." She walked down the steps until they stood only a few feet apart. Instead of reaching for the supposedly injured leg, she gently scratched beneath the wolf's chin. "There is nothing wrong with you today, is there?" The wolf remained perfectly still. She smiled knowingly. "That is what I thought." For several quiet moments, neither of them moved. Wind whispered through the towering pines while shafts of sunlight filtered across the clearing, warming the thick black fur beneath her fingertips. Emily could feel the steady rhythm of calm breathing, hear the quiet contentment in every slow exhale. The wolf was not seeking medicine. It was simply enjoying her company. That realization settled gently into her heart, bringing with it an unexpected warmth she had not experienced in years. She sat on the porch steps, and after only a moment's hesitation, the wolf settled beside her with surprising care, making certain not to crowd her. Together they watched a family of deer emerge cautiously at the edge of the meadow. Instead of fleeing, the graceful animals continued grazing peacefully, occasionally glancing toward the unusual pair before returning to the sweet summer grass. Emily smiled at the quiet scene unfolding before her. "I think you like it here," she whispered. The wolf turned its silver eyes toward her, and although it made no sound, something inside that steady gaze answered more clearly than words ever could. Hidden deep within the forest beyond the meadow, another pair of watchful eyes silently witnessed the gentle moment, and the unseen observer quietly rode away without disturbing either of them, carrying questions that would soon reach the highest halls of the kingdom. The quiet observer never introduced himself, and Emily never noticed the rider disappearing beyond the distant ridge, but the following morning brought another surprise waiting outside her clinic. Nestled neatly beside the porch steps sat a woven basket filled with crisp red apples, fresh honey sealed inside a small glass jar, and a bundle of wildflowers tied together with blue ribbon. Emily looked around the empty clearing before smiling toward the forest. "You really are determined to become my favorite patient," she said softly. Almost as if the words themselves had been an invitation, familiar footsteps rustled through the ferns. The black wolf emerged from between the towering pines, carrying something carefully between its teeth. It approached with deliberate care, stopping only a few feet away before lowering its head. A smooth walking stick carved from pale maple rested gently on the ground. The polished wood gleamed in the morning sunlight, decorated with tiny hand-carved leaves spiraling gracefully along its length. Emily blinked in surprise before picking it up. "You brought me a gift?" she whispered. The wolf sat proudly, its silver eyes fixed on her face, watching every expression with quiet anticipation. Emily turned the walking stick over in her hands. Whoever had crafted it possessed remarkable skill. The handle fit perfectly against her palm as though it had been measured specifically for her grip. She laughed softly, shaking her head in disbelief. "First berries, then biscuits, now handmade woodworking. You are setting impossible standards for every other visitor." The wolf's tail brushed happily across the grass. Emily leaned the walking stick beside the porch door where it caught the morning light. "Thank you," she said sincerely. The simple words seemed to matter. The wolf lowered its head slightly, almost like a gentleman acknowledging appreciation, before settling beside the porch. Throughout the morning, neighbors arrived one after another with injured companions needing attention. A little girl brought a rabbit that had tangled itself in a blackberry bush. An elderly couple carried an aging beagle struggling with stiff joints after years of faithful companionship. A farmer arrived with an exhausted sheepdog needing rest more than medicine. Through it all, the black wolf remained quietly nearby, never interfering, never startling a frightened animal. Quite the opposite happened. Nervous creatures relaxed faster whenever the wolf rested close to Emily. Even the timid rabbit, trembling when it first arrived, eventually hopped across the floor and curled comfortably against the wolf's enormous front paws while Emily finished applying a soothing herbal balm. The little girl stared with wide eyes. "Does he always help you?" she asked. Emily glanced toward the wolf, who looked back with perfect innocence. "Apparently," she answered with a smile, "although I do not remember hiring him." The child giggled before reaching out cautiously to pet the thick black fur. The wolf remained completely still, patient enough that the little girl soon wrapped both tiny arms around its neck in an affectionate hug. Emily watched the gentle scene with quiet amazement. There was not a trace of fear anywhere in the room. It was as though every living creature instinctively understood the heart hidden beneath the powerful frame. Late that afternoon, after the final visitor had gone home, Emily carried 2 cups onto the porch out of old habit before laughing at herself. One held warm herbal tea, the other held fresh water. She sat on the top step while the wolf settled beside her, both of them watching golden sunlight spill across the meadow as butterflies drifted lazily above the wildflowers. Neither needed conversation. The silence between them had become unexpectedly comfortable, filled with quiet. Understanding instead of loneliness. Emily traced one finger along the carved maple walking stick resting beside her chair. "You know," she said thoughtfully, looking toward the endless line of pine trees, "I still do not know your name." The wolf slowly turned its head toward her, and for one lingering moment those remarkable silver eyes reflected something deeper than simple affection, something carrying both warmth and an impossible secret that seemed to wait patiently for exactly the right moment to be discovered. 3 quiet days passed without a single visit, and for the first time since the mysterious wolf had become part of her mornings, Emily caught herself glancing toward the forest every few minutes. She told herself she was only checking the weather or admiring the early colors of autumn beginning to touch the highest branches, yet each time the wind rustled through the pines without revealing a familiar dark silhouette, an unexpected feeling settled inside her chest. It was not worry exactly. It was simply the absence of something she had grown accustomed to without realizing it. On the 4th morning, soft rain tapped gently against the clinic windows while gray clouds drifted low across the mountains. Emily brewed a pot of herbal tea, arranged fresh bandages on the work table, and quietly placed a bowl of clean water on the porch as she always did. She smiled at herself the moment she noticed the habit. "You are being ridiculous," she whispered. "He is a wild wolf, not someone with office hours." Even so, she left the bowl exactly where it belonged. Late that afternoon, just as she finished closing the shutters against the cool evening breeze, she heard hurried footsteps splashing through wet grass. She opened the door expecting another worried pet owner, but instead found a young park ranger standing on the porch, breathing a little harder than usual after climbing the forest trail. Rain glistened across his green jacket, while droplets clung to the brim of his hat. "Miss Carter," he said politely, "I hope I am not interrupting." Emily smiled warmly. "Not at all. What happened?" The ranger scratched the back of his neck with an uncertain expression. "Actually, I came to ask you something rather strange." Emily waited patiently. "Have you happened to see an unusually large black wolf around here?" She felt her heartbeat pause for only an instant before answering calmly. "Perhaps. Why do you ask?" The ranger looked relieved. "Good. Then I am not imagining things." He stepped closer to the porch railing, lowering his voice almost conspiratorially. "Several hikers have reported seeing the same wolf all over the valley this month. The funny part is that it never behaves like a normal wild animal." Emily tilted her head. "How so?" "Well," he replied with a puzzled smile, "it helps people." She blinked. The ranger continued. "Last week it guided a lost family back toward the main trail. Yesterday an elderly man dropped his walking stick near the creek, and somehow the wolf carried it back to him. Nobody can explain it. It never gets close enough to frighten anyone, but it always appears exactly when someone needs help." Emily looked toward the misty tree line beyond the clearing. Somehow none of that surprised her. It sounded exactly like the quiet companion who patiently waited beside her porch each morning. "Most people think it belongs to someone," the ranger added. "Its behavior is simply too civilized." Emily smiled faintly. "Maybe kindness can be learned." The ranger laughed. "Maybe." After thanking her for the conversation, he tipped his hat and walked back toward the trail, leaving Emily standing beneath the porch roof, while gentle rain continued falling across the valley. She watched the forest in thoughtful silence until movement finally caught her eye. Far beyond the nearest line of pines, almost hidden by drifting mist, a familiar pair of silver eyes watched from the shadows for only a heartbeat before quietly disappearing once again. Emily smiled without realizing it. "So," she whispered into the rain, "you have been helping everyone else too." Somewhere deep within the forest, a single contented howl drifted across the valley, carrying with it the comforting promise that this mysterious friendship was only beginning to reveal its true story. The next sunrise painted the mountaintops in soft shades of gold, but the familiar quiet around Emily's clinic felt different, almost expectant. She finished watering the flower boxes and rested both hands on the carved maple walking stick that now stood beside her front door. It had become a comforting reminder that even the strangest friendships could arrive without warning. She looked toward the pine forest just as a familiar dark shape stepped gracefully into the clearing. "Good morning," she said with a smile that appeared before she even realized it. The great black wolf answered with a gentle wag of its tail before walking toward the porch. Halfway across the meadow, however, it suddenly slowed. This time there was no dramatic limp, no exaggerated sigh, no awkward attempt to look injured. Instead, it simply stopped and watched her with those remarkable silver eyes. Emily frowned slightly. "No appointment today?" she teased. The wolf remained still. Its calm expression carried an unfamiliar seriousness that quietly erased the playful routine they had shared for weeks. Emily stepped down from the porch and crossed the damp grass until only a few feet separated them. "What is it?" she asked softly. The wolf lowered its head, then nudged something hidden beneath a cluster of fern leaves. Emily looked down in surprise. A tiny fawn lay curled beneath the greenery, its delicate legs tucked beneath its body as though it had become exhausted during the night. The little animal lifted its head weakly before releasing a tiny cry. Emily immediately knelt beside it, gently examining each slender leg and carefully checking its breathing. Nothing appeared broken. The frightened creature simply looked dehydrated and worn out after wandering too far from its mother. Emily smiled with relief. "You found this little one before I did." She reached into her satchel, removed a small bottle of clean water, and slowly helped the fawn drink a little at a time. The wolf never moved from its place beside them. Instead, it quietly watched over the clearing while birds continued singing overhead as though trusting everything would be all right. After several minutes, the fawn found enough strength to stand on slightly shaky legs. Emily laughed happily as it took a few uncertain steps before nuzzling against her shoulder. "There you are," she whispered. "You just needed someone to slow down and listen." She looked toward the wolf with grateful eyes. "Thank you for bringing me here." The wolf dipped its head almost modestly before glancing toward the deeper forest. At that exact moment, another deer appeared between the trees, cautiously calling to its missing fawn. The little animal immediately recognized the familiar sound and bounded toward its waiting mother. Emily watched the reunion with a warm smile spreading across her face. When she turned back to thank the wolf again, she noticed something she had never seen before. Tiny droplets of morning dew sparkled across its thick black coat like scattered diamonds, yet none of them disturbed the elegant silver crest woven into the leather collar hidden beneath its fur. Emily blinked. "A collar," she whispered. She had never noticed it before because the thick fur around its neck usually concealed everything. This one was unlike anything sold in nearby towns. The leather looked impossibly fine, embossed with delicate patterns that resembled ancient vines surrounding a single polished silver emblem. Before Emily could lean closer, the wolf calmly stepped back. It was not hiding from her. It simply seemed careful not to reveal too much. Emily smiled thoughtfully instead of pressing further. "Whoever you belong to," she said quietly, "they must care about you very much." The wolf held her gaze for one lingering moment. Something almost wistful flickered inside those silver eyes before it turned toward the forest once again. Emily watched until its powerful silhouette disappeared among the towering pines, unaware that far beyond the trees, hidden behind castle walls many miles away, another identical silver emblem rested upon a throne that ruled the entire kingdom. The silver emblem lingered in Emily's thoughts long after the mysterious wolf disappeared into the forest. She had spent years living among ranchers, hikers, park rangers, and craftsmen, yet she had never seen leatherwork or silver engraving of such remarkable quality. It was beautiful without being extravagant, elegant without demanding attention, almost as though it belonged to someone who had never needed to prove authority because everyone around them already recognized it. The following evening, a gentle autumn breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves across the valley while amber light stretched between the pines. Emily had nearly finished closing the clinic when hurried hoofbeats echoed along the narrow trail leading toward her home. She stepped onto the porch just as three riders emerged from the trees atop magnificent dark horses whose polished tack gleamed in the fading sunlight. Their clothing was practical yet unmistakably refined, trimmed with the same silver embroidery she had glimpsed upon the hidden collar only a day before. The riders stopped several yards from the porch, careful not to startle the animals resting nearby. One man dismounted first, removing his gloves before offering Emily a respectful nod. "Miss Emily Carter?" he asked politely. "Yes," she answered. "How may I help you?" The man exchanged a brief glance with his companions before speaking again. "We are looking for someone." Emily smiled gently. "You might need to be a little more specific." He hesitated. "A very unusual black wolf has been seen throughout this valley." Emily remained perfectly calm, although her heartbeat quietly quickened. "Many black wolves live in these mountains. Not one like this," another rider replied with an amused smile. "Exceptionally large. Silver eyes. Remarkably intelligent." Emily folded her arms thoughtfully. "That does sound memorable." The first rider looked around the peaceful clearing. His gaze settled upon the carved walking stick resting beside her front door, then drifted toward the bowls of fresh water near the porch steps. Finally, he noticed enormous paw prints pressed into the damp earth leading toward the forest. A warm smile slowly appeared across his face. He has been here. Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the tree line where evening shadows stretched beneath towering pines. Suppose he has, she said quietly. Should I be concerned? To her surprise, all three riders laughed softly. Quite the opposite, the eldest replied. If he keeps returning, you have nothing to fear. Emily raised one eyebrow. You sound very certain. We know his character. The simple confidence behind those words settled gently into the silence between them. Emily studied each face carefully. None appeared frightened. None seemed angry. If anything, they looked relieved. Does he belong to one of you? She asked. The youngest rider nearly answered before the oldest subtly shook his head. You could say, the older man replied carefully, that we serve the same household. Emily noticed the deliberate choice of words, but decided not to press further. Before she could ask another question, a familiar rustle echoed from the edge of the clearing. Every rider turned at once. The great black wolf stepped quietly from between the pines, its silver eyes moving first to Emily before briefly acknowledging the three men. For one astonishing moment, the riders placed a hand over their hearts and bowed their heads with effortless respect. It was not the cautious gesture one might offer a dangerous animal. It was the instinctive greeting reserved for someone deeply honored. Emily looked from the wolf to the riders, then back again. The pieces refused to fit together, yet every passing day made the mystery even harder to ignore. The wolf calmly walked past the waiting horses without a trace of hesitation and stopped beside Emily's porch exactly where it always did. The oldest rider smiled knowingly before climbing back into his saddle. Miss Carter, he said warmly, I believe the truth will introduce itself when the time is right. With that, the three riders quietly turned their horses and disappeared into the deepening twilight, leaving Emily standing beside the silent wolf while a single question echoed through her mind. What kind of animal inspired loyal men to bow as though greeting their king? Sleep did not come easily that night. Emily lay awake listening to the gentle chorus of crickets beyond her bedroom window, while one impossible image replayed again and again inside her thoughts. Three confident riders, dressed with quiet elegance, had lowered their heads before a single black wolf as naturally as breathing. She had seen respect countless times throughout her life. She recognized courtesy, admiration, even loyalty. What she had witnessed was something entirely different. It had carried the effortless certainty reserved for someone whose presence alone inspired devotion. When dawn finally painted pale ribbons of gold across the eastern sky, Emily stepped outside carrying two steaming mugs by habit before smiling at herself. One mug held fragrant chamomile tea. The other was empty. She laughed softly, setting the empty cup beside her rocking chair anyway. You are becoming part of my routine, she admitted to the silent forest. The morning breeze answered by stirring the tall grass that surrounded the clearing. Moments later, familiar footsteps emerged from the pines. The black wolf appeared exactly as it always had, calm, graceful, and somehow perfectly at home in every corner of the valley. Yet today, Emily noticed details she had overlooked before. The animal never hurried. It never searched nervously. It carried itself with quiet confidence, almost as though every path already belonged to it. Good morning, she whispered. The wolf approached until it stood close enough for sunlight to reveal tiny silver threads woven into the leather collar beneath its thick fur. Emily slowly reached out. This time, instead of stepping away, the wolf remained perfectly still. Her fingers gently brushed aside the soft black fur around its neck. The silver emblem rested only inches from her hand, cool beneath the morning light. Delicate lines surrounded the crest, forming patterns that looked ancient rather than decorative. She traced one fingertip across the edge without removing the collar. You trust me, she murmured almost to herself. The wolf closed its eyes for a brief moment, leaning gently into her touch. Emily smiled, but another thought quietly settled into her heart. I think I trust you too. The words surprised even her. She had spent years protecting her peaceful life from disappointment, politely keeping everyone at arm's length. Yet somehow this mysterious visitor had crossed every barrier. Without speaking a single word, she picked up the carved maple walking stick resting beside the porch and held it beside the silver emblem. The craftsmanship matched perfectly. Whoever had created one had almost certainly created the other. "You have friends with remarkable talent," she observed. The wolf gave a soft huff that sounded suspiciously close to amusement. Emily laughed. "Or perhaps you simply have excellent taste." They spent the next hour wandering slowly through the meadow together. Emily gathered herbs while the wolf walked beside her, occasionally pausing whenever she stopped to admire late autumn flowers or watch butterflies drifting above the wild grasses. Nothing about the morning felt extraordinary anymore. Somehow the extraordinary had quietly become ordinary. As they returned toward the clinic, movement caught Emily's attention near the edge of the trail. An elderly woman carrying a basket had slipped slightly on loose gravel, scattering apples across the path. Before Emily could take more than one step, the wolf calmly reached the woman first. Instead of startling her, it gently nudged rolling apples back within easy reach using its nose with remarkable care. The woman looked up, smiled warmly, and softly stroked the thick black fur. "There you are again," she said affectionately. "Always helping." Emily stopped in surprise. "You know him?" The elderly woman chuckled. "Know him? No, but everyone around these mountains has heard stories by now." She glanced fondly toward the wolf before continuing. "Some say he watches over lonely travelers. Others say he appears whenever kindness is needed. Whatever the truth may be, every story ends the same way. Anyone fortunate enough to meet those silver eyes always leaves with hope." Emily looked quietly toward the wolf, who simply stood beside the old woman with the same gentle patience it had shown her from the very beginning. For the first time, Emily realized she might not be the only person whose life had been quietly changed by the mysterious guardian of the forest. Perhaps she had simply been the one blessed to know him best. 2 mornings later, the valley awoke beneath a sky so brilliantly clear that every distant mountain seemed close enough to touch. Emily opened the windows of the clinic, letting cool autumn air drift through the cedar shelves and dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. The familiar scent of pine mixed with lavender and warm cinnamon from the bread she had baked before sunrise. She found herself smiling before she even looked outside, almost expecting to see a pair of silver eyes waiting patiently near the porch. Instead, the clearing stood empty. She told herself not to be disappointed. Wild creatures came and went according to their own paths. She had learned that lesson long ago. Yet as the hours slipped quietly by, she caught herself glancing toward the forest again and again. Shortly after noon, the distant sound of carriage wheels echoed along the winding trail. Emily stepped onto the porch as an elegant black carriage emerged from between the pines, followed by several riders wearing the same understated silver embroidery she had noticed before. They stopped respectfully several yards away. One of the riders she recognized immediately. It was the older gentleman who had visited days earlier. He removed his hat with a warm smile. "Miss Carter," he greeted gently. "I hope we are not arriving at an inconvenient time." Emily returned the smile. "Not at all. Is everything all right?" The man nodded. "More than all right. We have come with an invitation." Emily looked curiously toward the carriage. "An invitation?" He reached inside his coat and carefully removed a sealed envelope made of thick ivory paper. The silver wax seal pressed across the flap carried the same elegant crest she had seen upon the mysterious collar. This time she recognized it instantly. The delicate vines, the polished silver emblem, the ancient design. Her fingers hesitated before accepting it. "Who sent this?" she asked quietly. The older man smiled with unmistakable affection. "Someone who believes you have shown extraordinary kindness without ever asking who deserved it." Emily slowly broke the seal. Inside rested a single handwritten note. The graceful lettering was confident but unpretentious. It read, "Thank you for seeing a heart before you searched. For a name. If you would honor me, I would like to finally introduce myself properly. Please join me tomorrow afternoon at Ashford Manor. Transportation will be waiting should you accept." Emily read the message twice before looking back toward the writer. "Ashford Manor?" she repeated softly. The man inclined his head. "Yes." She searched his expression. "Who lives there?" For the first time since arriving, every rider exchanged quiet smiles with one another. The older gentleman answered with gentle honesty. "The man you have already welcomed into your life." Emily felt a pleasant shiver of confusion. I do not understand. You will. His voice carried absolute certainty. Tomorrow, every question you have been patiently carrying will finally receive its answer. Emily lowered her eyes to the handwritten note once more. Something about the words felt strangely familiar. Calm, thoughtful, humble. Exactly like the silent companion who had never demanded anything except a little kindness and a place to rest. Before she could ask another question, movement stirred at the edge of the forest. The great black wolf stepped quietly into the clearing. Unlike every visit before, it did not walk toward the porch. It remained standing beneath the tall pines, watching Emily with calm silver eyes while sunlight shimmered softly across the hidden silver collar beneath its fur. Emily looked from the letter in her hands to the waiting wolf, then back to the riders whose warm smiles revealed they had already witnessed this silent exchange many times before. Without speaking a single word, the wolf lowered its head ever so slightly, as though inviting her to take one final step toward the truth that had patiently waited for her from the very beginning. The following afternoon arrived wrapped in clear autumn sunshine that turned every golden leaf into a tiny piece of light. Emily stood quietly on the porch of her little clinic, the invitation folded carefully inside her coat pocket while the carved maple walking stick rested beside the front door. Before leaving, she filled the water bowls one last time, adjusted the blankets in the small recovery room for any wandering animals that might arrive after sunset, and smiled at the peaceful home that had sheltered both lonely creatures and unexpected miracles. The elegant carriage carried her through forests she had walked for years, yet somehow every familiar trail seemed different now. When the trees finally opened, Ashford Manor appeared beyond a broad meadow, its stone walls rising with quiet dignity rather than overwhelming grandeur. Colorful gardens surrounded the estate, and rescued horses grazed peacefully in nearby fields. Birds nested beneath the broad eaves without fear, while a family of deer wandered freely near the orchard. Emily noticed the smallest details first. Every stable was spotless. Every animal looked healthy. Every servant she passed paused to greet the horses before greeting one another. Whatever kind of man lived here, kindness had clearly reached every corner of his home. The carriage stopped before wide oak doors that opened before she could knock. The same older gentleman welcomed her with a warm smile. He has been waiting all afternoon, he said gently. Emily followed him through sunlit halls decorated not with glittering trophies, but with paintings of forests, mountains, and wildlife. The home felt surprisingly peaceful, almost familiar. They reached a pair of tall glass doors overlooking an expansive garden. Beyond them stood a man dressed in a simple dark jacket, his back turned as he watched a pair of bluebirds drinking from a stone fountain. He slowly turned at the sound of approaching footsteps. Emily stopped walking. The silver eyes were unmistakable. They were the same calm eyes that had watched her grind herbs, comfort frightened animals, laugh on the porch, and greet every sunrise. Only now they belonged to a tall man whose quiet smile carried the same warmth she had known from the very beginning. His dark hair stirred gently in the breeze as he stepped forward. "Hello, Emily," he said softly. Even his voice felt strangely familiar, as though she had heard it hidden inside every patient silence they had ever shared. "My name is Damien Ashford." Emily searched his face, then those impossible silver eyes, before a quiet laugh escaped her. It was not disbelief. It was the joyful sound of every unanswered question finally finding its place. "It was you," she whispered. Damien nodded with gentle honesty. "Every visit." She folded her arms with playful determination. "Every mysterious gift." "Yes." "Every morning?" "Without fail." Emily tilted her head, pretending to examine him as carefully as she had examined his many imaginary injuries. "Then I suppose I should ask the most important question." Damien smiled. "Please do." She took one slow step closer. How many of those injuries were actually real? For the first time since they met, the dignified Alpha King looked almost embarrassed. A faint smile reached the corners of his eyes as he admitted, "None of the first 12. Emily laughed so brightly that birds fluttered into the air around the garden. She shook her head, unable to hide her amusement. "I knew it." Damien laughed with her before his expression grew quietly sincere. "At first, I only wanted an excuse to meet the healer who treated every frightened creature with the same kindness. Then I discovered I kept inventing reasons to return because those mornings became the happiest part of my day. Emily looked into the eyes she had trusted long before she knew the name behind them. Nothing about him felt different. He was still the patient companion who waited while she worked, who protected lost animals, who carried thoughtful gifts, and who never demanded anything in return. The title of Alpha King changed nothing that truly mattered. She smiled warmly and reached out, gently straightening the silver collar that now rested in his hands instead of around his neck. "Next time," she said with a playful sparkle in her eyes, "if you wish to visit my clinic, you do not have to pretend to be injured." Damien chuckled. "Does that mean I am still welcome?" Emily looked toward the open gardens where rescued animals wandered freely beneath the afternoon sun before meeting his eyes once more. "Of course," she replied. "Every healer deserves one wonderfully stubborn patient, even if he happens to be a king." Their shared laughter drifted across the gardens, and somewhere beyond the estate, a lone wolf answered, with a joyful howl that echoed through the mountains, carrying the simple truth that the greatest bonds are never built upon titles or power, but upon quiet acts of kindness freely given and gratefully returned.